The grease under my fingernails feels more like a part of me than my own skin sometimes. It's a stubborn reminder of long days and even longer nights spent under the hoods of other people's lives, trying to mend the things that get them from one place to another. My dad, Mel, used to say a mechanic doesn't just fix cars. We fix problems. A broken down truck isn't just a piece of machinery. It's a missed day of work. A kid who can't get to the doctor. A promise that can't be kept. I've held on to that since he passed and left me the garage. Mel's Auto and Repair, the sign still says, swinging and creaking in the wind like an old, tired bone. The garage is my inheritance, a legacy of busted knuckles, honest work, and the constant, overwhelming smell of gasoline and oil. It's a small two-bay operation on the edge of a town that's seen better days. Most of our customers are folks like me, hard-working people who drive their cars until the wheels are about to protest and roll away on their own. We're a community of making do, of patching things up and hoping for the best. Flashy signs and slick coupon mailers belong to the big chain shops over on the highway. My business runs on word of mouth and a reputation for not cheating people. Some days, that feels like enough. Other days, when I'm staring at a pile of invoices and the numbers just don't add up, it feels like I'm treading water in a deep, dark ocean. My dad had a rule, a quiet little tradition he never advertised. Once a week, if someone came in who was truly in a bind, he'd do the repair for free. He'd just shake their hand, tell them to pay it forward, and send them on their way. He kept a small, dog-eared notebook in his desk drawer, not with names, but with dates and the work done. Fixed a flat for a young mom, replaced a battery for an old-timer, gave a kid a ride home in the rain. I found that notebook after he was gone, and I decided to keep the tradition alive. It was my way of keeping him with me, of honoring the man who taught me everything I know about engines and about being a decent human being. Business had been slow for a couple of months. A dry spell, my dad would have called it. The kind that makes you start counting the change in the coffee can and putting off buying the things you really need. My main hydraulic lift was groaning like a dying animal, and my diagnostic tools were so outdated they might as well have been museum pieces. I dreamed of a new two-post lift, of a toolbox that wasn't rusted shut on one side, of maybe, just maybe, hiring another pair of hands so I wasn't doing everything myself. But dreams don't pay the bills. That IT was on one of those slow, quiet Tuesday afternoons that he pulled in. His truck, an old Dodge that looked like it had been through World War II, limped into my gravel lot with a sound that was more of a pained gas than an engine running. It shuddered to a stop, and a plume of dark, unhappy smoke coughed out from under the hood before everything fell silent. For a long moment, the driver just sat there, his silhouette a still, quiet shape behind the cracked windshield. I grabbed a rag, wiped my hands out of habit, and walked out to meet him. The man who stepped out of the cab was as weathered as his truck. He was elderly, with a thin frame that seemed too fragile for the heavy work boots he wore. His face was a road map of wrinkles, and his eyes, though tired, held a quiet sort of pride. He introduced himself simply as Jack, his voice raspy and low, as if he hadn't used it much that day, having some trouble. I asked, my eyes already scanning the truck, diagnosing its ailments from a distance. The tires were worn, nearly bald. I could see a dark, telltale slick of fluid spreading on the gravel beneath the engine, and the whole frame seemed to sag with exhaustion. She's given up on me, I think, he said, his gaze fixed on the dying vehicle like he was watching a friend pass away. He told me it was his only way of getting around, that it hadn't been running right for months, but he'd been putting off getting it looked at. I knew what that meant. He didn't have the money. He hesitated, then looked at me with an honesty that was almost painful. I don't have much, just enough to cover some parts, maybe. If you could just tell me what's wrong, I could try to. Well, I'm not sure what I could do. I nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken words. He was a proud man, not looking for a handout, but stuck between a rock and a hard place. I popped the hood, and the sight that greeted me was about what I expected. A mess of cracked hoses, frayed wires, and an engine block stained with years. of leaked fluids. It needed a lot more than just a few new parts. This was a major surgery. A new water pump for sure. A full flush, new belts, probably a head gasket. The parts alone would be more than he could afford, let alone the labor. I spent the next hour looking everything over, with Jack watching me in silence. He never asked how much it would cost. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, with an expression that was a mixture of hope and resignation. My dog, Rusty, a scruffy mutt who spent his days sleeping on a pile of old rags in the corner of the office, trotted out and nudged Jack's hand with his wet nose. Jack absently stroked his head, his eyes never leaving me. Finally, I closed the hood and wiped my hands on the rag again. I looked at the old man, at his worn-out boots and his tired eyes, and I thought about my dad's notebook. This was one of those times. "Here's the deal, Jack," I said, trying to sound casual, like this was just another day at the office. "The parts are going to run a few $100s, but I've got some time on my hands this week. Tell you what, you cover the parts, and I'll take care of the labor. No charge." He looked at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, searching my face for the catch. "No charge? That's a lot of work. I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering," I said with a small smile. "Consider it a professional courtesy. Besides, I like a good challenge." I glanced at the old Dodge. "And this old girl looks like she'll be a challenge." He was quiet for a long time. He looked from me to the truck and back again. I could see the internal struggle on his face, the pride wrestling with the necessity. Finally, he gave a slow, reluctant nod. "If you're sure," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he was trying hard to hide. "I'm sure," I replied. "Just do me a favor. Someday, if you see someone in a bind, help them out. Pay it forward." He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something warm in them. "I will," he said, and it sounded like a solemn vow. "I promise." He left the truck with me, and for the next 3 days, I poured everything I had into it. It was a beast of a job. I had to special order parts, degrease components that hadn't seen the light of day in decades, and solve a dozen little problems that popped up along the way. There were moments when I was hunched over the engine bay, my back screaming in protest, and my hands covered in cuts and grease, that I questioned my sanity. The money for the parts ate up what little buffer I had, and the time I was spending on this free job was time I wasn't spending on paying customers. Not that there was a line of them waiting, but every time I felt that flicker of doubt, I thought of Jack's face. I thought of my dad. This was more than just a repair. It was about keeping a promise, both to the old man and to myself. When I finally finished, late on a Thursday evening, and turned the key, the engine rumbled to life with a steady, healthy purr. It was a beautiful sound. Jack came by the next morning to pick it up. When I handed him the keys, he just stared at the truck, then at me. He walked around it, touching the hood like he couldn't believe it was real. He didn't say much, but he didn't have to. The gratitude in his eyes was thanks enough. He insisted on giving me the money for the parts, counting out the bills into my hand with his own calloused ones. Then, he shook my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "I won't forget this," he said. And with that, he climbed into his resurrected truck and drove away, leaving me standing in the gravel lot, feeling a little tired, a little poorer, but mostly feeling good. The weeks that followed were a return to the usual grind. A few oil changes here, a brake job there. The slow trickle of business was just enough to keep the lights on, but the dream of a new lift and better tools felt further away than ever. I patched up my old equipment as best I could and kept going, the memory of Jack's truck fading into the background of my daily struggles. I didn't expect to ever see him again. People in this town came and went, and his was just one of many faces, one of many stories that passed through my garage. Then, one Friday morning, about 3 weeks later, something strange happened. I was in the middle of wrestling with a stubborn bolt on an old sedan when I heard a sound that didn't belong in my world. It was the deep, powerful rumble of a large diesel engine, followed by the hydraulic hiss of air brakes. It was too clean, too powerful for any of the local haulers. I put my wrench down and walked to the bay door, Wiping my brow with the back of my arm, pulling into my small lot was a massive, gleaming flatbed truck. It was brand new, polished to a mirror shine, and looked completely out of place against the backdrop of my rusty, old garage. It was the kind of truck you see making deliveries to major dealerships or industrial sites, not to a small, independent shop like mine. My heart did a little nervous flutter. Deliveries I hadn't ordered usually meant a mistake, or worse, a bill I couldn't pay. The flatbed came to a smooth stop, and a man in a crisp navy blue uniform hopped down from the cab, a clipboard in his hand. He looked around the lot, his eyes scanning the area until they landed on me. "Melanie?" he asked, a friendly smile on his face. I hesitated for a second, my mind racing. "Yeah, that's me." He walked over and handed me the clipboard. "Got a delivery for you." I looked down at the list, and my breath caught in my throat. My eyes scanned the items, but my brain refused to process what it was seeing. One bend pack 2-post lift complete shop air compressor system 80-inch professional series rolling tool cabinet. Fully stocked up Maxissy's ultra diagnostic tablet. Kitty stared at the list, my voice barely a whisper. There must be a mistake. This isn't mine. I didn't order any of this." I looked up at the massive crates and pallets strapped to the back of the flatbed. The scale of it was overwhelming. This was more than just a delivery. It was a complete overhaul of my entire shop. It was the kind of equipment I had spent years dreaming about, knowing I could probably never afford it. "No mistake," the driver said, tapping the paper on the clipboard with his pen. "Paid in full upfront. The order was placed under your name and your shop's address. Says right here it's a gift from a Mr. Jack Owens." The name hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Jack! The old man with the beat-up Dodge. The one I had helped for free. My eyes darted from the driver's smiling face to the impossible cargo on the truck and back again. It didn't make any sense. This was insane. This was the kind of equipment that cost tens of thousands of dollars. It was a life-changing amount of gear from Jack. I stammered, feeling my knees go weak. As the delivery driver and his partner began to unstrap the cargo, moving with a practiced efficiency, I just stood there, frozen in a state of complete and utter disbelief. They used a forklift to carefully lower a massive, heavy-duty 2-post lift onto the concrete floor of my empty bay. Then came the giant toolbox, a gleaming monument of steel and promise. Then the state-of-the-art compressor, and finally, the diagnostic tablet that was more advanced than anything I had ever laid hands on. As they were arranging the last of the items, one of the workers came over to me. He was holding a plain white envelope. "This was taped to the top of the toolbox," he said, handing it to me. "Sender said you'd know what it was." I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name, Melanie, was written on the front, in neat, steady block letters. No return address, no company logo, just my name. I walked back into my cluttered little office, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sounds of the delivery truck preparing to leave were a distant hum. I sat down at my old worn desk and stared at the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. With a deep breath, I carefully tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper, torn from a spiral notebook. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, strong and clear. I unfolded it and began to read. "Melanie, I hope this equipment finds you well. Please, do not think of this as a payment. Think of it as an investment. You were right when you said that my old truck was a challenge. It's been a challenge for me for the last 15 years, ever since my son, Daniel, passed away. He was a mechanic, just like you. He bought that old Dodge with his first real paycheck and spent every spare minute he had working on it. It was his pride and joy. After we lost him, I couldn't bring myself to sell it, but I couldn't bear to drive it either. It just sat in my barn, collecting dust and rust, a painful reminder of what I had lost. This year, I finally decided I had to get it running again. For him, I took it to 3 different shops before I came to yours. The first two quoted me a price that was more than the truck was worth and treated me like I was a foolish old man clinging to a piece of junk. They saw a broken down truck. They didn't see the memories stored in its rusted frame. Then I came to you. You didn't see a piece of junk either. You didn't see a payday. You saw a person in a bind, and you offered a helping hand without asking for anything in return. You treated me with respect and kindness. In fixing my son's truck, you did more than just replace some old parts. You breathed life back into a piece of his soul that I had been keeping locked away. You gave me back the sound of his engine, the feeling of him riding beside me. You fixed my problem, just like a good mechanic does. I didn't tell you who I was that day because I didn't want it to matter. I spent my life building a successful manufacturing company, and I've learned that money can make people act in strange ways. I wanted to see what would happen if I was just Jack, an old man with a broken down truck. Your character, Melanie, is worth more than all the flashy signs on the highway. You have your father's integrity, and that's a rare thing in this world. So please, accept this gift. It's not charity. It's a thank you from a grateful father, and it's an investment in someone who I know will do great things with it. Keep being the person you are. The world needs more people like you, and please, keep paying it forward. Yours, Jack. Owen's tears were streaming down my face by the time I finished reading. They dripped onto the worn wood of my dad's desk, mingling with years of oil stains. I clutched the letter to my chest, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled me over. It wasn't about the equipment. It was about the fact that someone had seen me, really seen me. They had seen my struggle, my hard work, and the values my father had instilled in me. That day, everything changed. The new lift was installed, and suddenly, jobs that used to take me hours took half the time. The new diagnostic tools allowed me to pinpoint problems with an accuracy I had only dreamed of. The new toolbox was a joy to work with, every tool in its place. My little garage was transformed. Word spread through town like wildfire. People would stop by just to look at the new setup, their eyes wide with amazement. My business boomed. Trucks and cars I never would have been able to handle before were now lining up in my lot. I was finally able to hire some help, a sharp young kid named Carmen who was eager to learn, but the most important thing that changed was inside me. Jack's gift hadn't just revitalized my business, it had revitalized my spirit. It was a powerful, tangible reminder that kindness is never wasted. It ripples out into the world in ways we can never predict. I framed Jack's letter and hung it on the wall in my office, right next to a picture of my dad. And every week, without fail, I open up that old dog-eared notebook of his and I make an entry. I still fix a flat tire for a single mom or replace a battery for an elderly couple. And when they ask me what they owe, I just smile and tell them the same thing I told Jack. Just pay it forward.